Hello there and welcome to the video. We are going to dive into the final 8 at the World Cup in Sochi. Only 8 players remain, and well, the favorite must be the world champion, and we are going to look at his game. He has the black pieces and he's playing against Etienne Bacrot. Etienne Bacrot, a French grandmaster for a long time. He was the French #1 until a certain Maxime Vachier-Lagrave came along. But Bacrot, a very solid player, strong grandmaster in his own right, and well, he's here in the final 8. He earned his spot and he's playing the world champion. And he opened up with a pawn to e4, and it looks like Magnus is sticking to 1 e5. And well, one wonders if that's going to be his weapon in the World Championship. If Nepo is going with pawn to e4, I guess only time will tell. Or if he'll go to the Sicilian like he successfully did against Caruana. But okay, we have the Ruy Lopez, one of the most respected and oldest openings in chess. Knight f6, castles, bishop b7, rook e1, b5. This is all well known. And here Bacrot opts for a4. And this is one of those what we call anti-martial lines. So he played a4. So what do we mean anti-martial? Well, if white plays c3, a very respected move for c3. A very respected move here would be to play at d5. And if takes, knight takes, and knight takes e5, and this is the so-called martial attack. Black will play c6, most often d4, sometimes d3, and bishop d6. So take note here: black sacrifices a pawn, and the bishop moves to this diagonal. And you know, there's loads of theory in these lines, and many players prefer to avoid it. Because it's dangerous, yes, but also because it's kind of a drawing weapon at the highest level. So people prefer to play, lines with d3, a4, stuff like that, some, anti-martial lines. And this will become relevant because, well, Magnus will play a line that, or an idea similar to the martial. So bishop b7, d3, d6, fairly standard stuff here, although bishop d2, not super standard. Queen d7, black has finished development and connected the rooks, so the world champion knows the fundamentals. Knight to c3 and knight to a5, hitting the bishop. White wants to keep it, and now c5 in the style of the Chigorin variation. The knight moves so we can influence the center a little bit more with the pawns. Knight e2 here by white. This knight often finds a better home here on g3, knight c6. The knight sort of finished its job. Now we have more, influence in the center. So the knight returns from the rim, and knight c3. And here Magnus plays d5. So similar to the martial attack, although circumstances are not the same. Both sides are better developed, but in many lines this is a standard idea by black to sacrifice this pawn. But white doesn't take it just yet, and the reason is if you take it immediately, we're going to take twice, and bishop f6 at the end will target the b2 pawn. The rook would have to move, the b2 pawn will hang. So c3 was played by Bacrot, so now he's threatening to take on e5. But Magnus does not defend the pawn. He plays rook a to d8, he plays actively. Also we have a weak pawn here. It's not in the spirit of the position to play passively now, bishop f6 or something like that. Maybe knight e4 there, and the bishop would have to move anyway because of the pawn and the threat of losing the bishop pair. And white would get an initiative, and then maybe bishop d5 next, stuff like that. So Magnus prefers rook a to d8 here. Rook a to d8, a takes b5, a takes b5, and now Bacrot accepts the pawn sacrifice. Takes on e5 and bishop d6, just like in the martial attack. The bishop moves to a better diagonal here, and well, compared to the marshal, we have a much better bishop here as well. So definitely black has something going for him here. Rook to e1 and knight to f4. So opening up for the bishop. And we have kind of a double attack because the knight is attacking both of these pawns. So white is kind of forced here to take. And he does. Bishop takes f4. Bishop takes f4. Now this is under attack, but we defend here indirectly with knight to e4. We're hitting this pawn. And Magnus defends it. Queen g7, defending the pawn, but also creating an attack here. We have this battery and an attack on h2. Now, perhaps, given that 2 moves later, Bacrot plays the queen to h5, maybe he should just have done that immediately. Because what he does now, I don't like. And I'll tell you why in a few moments. g3, f4, and bishop d6. And now he plays queen h5. The difference is this diagonal now is just deadly. We have to find some way to control it, but we can't anymore with the pawns. The pawns, they're out of the question. If we had a pawn on g2, we could maybe play f3, and then we could blunt this bishop a little bit on the diagonal. But with the pawns here and here, trying to defend these squares is next to impossible. And Magnus immediately jumps on it, plays queen c6. And here, white needs to find precise moves. He needs to prevent the moves that black can play to increase the power of this battery here. So black can play the move c4 to undermine. That's a strong move. And at some stage f5 is very annoying. So probably white has to play c4 or f5. And probably c4 is the best move. Stopping black from playing c4. And we don't have time for f5, of course, because this will come with check, picking up the queen. The bishop here. Sneaky bishop. So probably that was the best way to try to do something. But queen h3 looks like a bad move. And now Magnus undermines, plays c4. d4 by Bacrot, and rook d to e8. Now, I think Magnus could have played f5 here, and that looks quite good. f5, and what to do? I mean, white could try this. He could also get passive with knight f2. An aggressive move like this seems like it's too much. We'd stop the mate. Of course, we're not mating here. The king comes here. But after knight e6, rook d to e8, we can't really take this. It's a complicated line, but the key is that bishop takes f4 is very strong. And this is basically winning for black. We're going to get this rook, and the remaining the remaining pieces just stand horribly, and they don't really have any squares. For instance, queen f1, then you lose control over h2, and you lose. But this is maybe hard to see in the complicated line. Also, knight f2 is possible, but black is doing very well there as well. I kind of like this move, rook a8, which completely paralyzes the bishop. You can't move the bishop because the rook would hang, and you can't move the rook because the bishop would hang. So you can imagine we cut off the a file, and we basically play the rest of the board up a piece. This looks very good for black. So f5 comes into consideration, but rook d to e8 is also very strong, putting pressure on this knight. And Bacrot opts for d5 here. Queen takes d5. Bishop c5 was also, queen b6 was also very possible. I'm wondering if Magnus didn't fancy some lines, maybe here. Trying to avoid complications. This move maybe, and then queen f5, hitting this and hitting this. Actually queen g4 check first. So you can take on f6 with check. And this is actually a little bit annoying. although the computer keeps control. In fact, the computer says bishop a3 is winning for black, but you can see that, okay, black might want to avoid that. So he took with the queen on d5, which still keeps the pressure here, and I guess he must have seen the idea that he played in the game, rook a to d1. I mean, if the queen moves, or it doesn't move, then we can take on d6. But Magnus had a pretty nice idea here. So what was his idea? Can you see it? And you see that they're getting pretty low on the clock here. And Magnus played rook takes e4. Fantastic move. Now we win a piece, so we have to take the queen. There's nothing else. We can't take on e4. Then we take on d1, and then take on e4, and we just stop rook. So we have to take the queen. There's check, king f2, and rook f2 e8, a quiet move. We sack the queen, and we play a quiet move. And this is quite nice. The threat is mate. If the rook moves, and it's mate, because now the bishop would cover f3, and this would come with check and be mate. And if the rook would try to protect here, we'll play bishop c5 check. We can only interpose and the same mate. And the bishop covers this. So we have to give up the rook, and Bacrot did so with rook to e5. And now Magnus took with bishop on e5, which is good, but this looks stronger to take with this rook. We'd have to take back and bishop c5. And this would increase the scope of black's pieces tremendously. Just going to take with the rook on e5, and the king is very much in danger. But okay, Magnus took with the bishop on e5. King takes e1, bishop takes c3. And okay, we can take stock here. Magnus has a rook and the bishop and the pawn for the queen. So technically material is equal, but comparing king safety, this king is not feeling very well with both of the bishops and the rook very active. White's pieces are not too great. The bishop is not participating, and the queen is not very active. So black is definitely better here, but it's not much, and we have to be careful. Once the queen gets activated, things can spiral downwards pretty quickly. For instance, queen d7 at the right time could be annoying. So Magnus played bishop c8 to avoid that. Queen to g2 and bishop f5. Here rook d8 was also very strong. With the same idea, if you take the bishop, I will give you this check and you're in trouble. The move Magnus played was bishop f5, and again, if you take, there's going to be bishop check, and then the rook will land on check on e2, eventually picking up the queen, which is pretty. You can play king g1, then rook e1, so it comes, it amounts to the same, but it's completely winning. Although it's only one pawn, this bishop is just out of the game. It can't come in here, and it can't get activated, so black just brings the king probably and plays b4 and wins. So after bishop f5, Bacrot played queen d5, hitting the bishop. Bishop came back to e6, queen to c5. I wonder why he did not take on b5 though. Yeah, then bishop h3, yeah. And probably get mated. So queen c5 keeps an eye on this diagonal. We take this, I'm guessing this is coming. This looks pretty deadly here, bishop d4. So he has to keep an eye on the diagonal, so he played queen c5. Bishop takes b2. And now the same thing, if you take on b5, again this check, so that explains king to g2 by Bacrot. Bishop d7, trying to hold on to the pawn. And here I think queen c7 is annoying, hitting the bishop, and if you move here, we go back here. And black needs to find some precise moves. He's better, but he still needs to take care. After this one, however, rook d8 by Magnus, and now, even though after g4, white got the b5 pawn, the c pawn is very strong, and actually Bacrot, he gave up fighting here. We just reached the time control. Let's move 44. and it's basically a hopeless position for white. Okay, he's only down technically 1 pawn, 1 point of material, but I mean the threats are too strong. Rook d2 and then c2 winning the bishop, and there's simply no chance for the queen if this happens, and it will happen because we can just line up the pieces here, bishop here, and then move the pawn. And there's no chance because the king will always be safe on g7. And then we'll simply win this pawn and we'll start marching the pawns, and there's no way to create any counterplay whatsoever. So Bacrot resigned. Pretty nice game by Magnus. He played a pawn sacrifice in the opening, pounced on it, and then sacrificed the queen. I'm sure, Bacrot could have defended better, but I mean, once you're under this much pressure from the world champion, it's hard to really criticize your play. Difficult task for Bacrot now. He has to win on demand with the black pieces, and I think we can basically bet on Magnus advancing here. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I do not mind if you press a thumbs up and leave some nice comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye bye.